The unilateral nature of large-scale migration from the global south into majority-white Western nations, without a corresponding reciprocal flow of Western populations into non-Western countries, serves as a primary focal point for researchers investigating systemic demographic shifts. Analysts who argue that these patterns reflect a deliberate, racially motivated agenda point to the asymmetric structure of global immigration frameworks as evidence of intent. From this perspective, the implementation of expansive immigration policies, coupled with the relaxation of border enforcement by supranational bodies and national governments, is viewed not as a series of random humanitarian responses, but as a coordinated mechanism designed to alter the traditional demographic, cultural, and political landscapes of Western societies. Proponents of this view emphasize that the lack of any parallel movement to diversify non-Western nations suggests a double standard in global governance, where demographic preservation is permitted in some regions while actively dismantled in others, thereby indicating an underlying agenda aimed specifically at Western demographics. The conceptualization of this demographic shifts framework as a top-down, engineered initiative relies heavily on analyzing the role of supranational institutions, most notably the United Nations. Analysts tracing this line of inquiry point to historical and contemporary policy documents, such as the UN Population Division's explicit studies on replacement migration, the multi-state adoption of the Global Compact for safe, orderly and regular migration, and specific frameworks addressing global wealth redistribution, as institutional blueprints designed to facilitate, normalize, and fund unilateral population flows. Within this investigative framework, globalist organizations are seen as utilizing their bureaucratic and financial leverage to bypass national sovereignty, embedding migration management guidelines and resource-sharing mandates directly into the governance models of sovereign Western states. Scholars and researchers contrast this top-down policy implementation with a distinct bottom-up counter-response, characterized by widespread public protests, localized resistance, and growing political populism across majority-white nations. This sharp divergence between elite-level supranational directives and the explicit, democratic pushback from working-class populations at the grassroots level is presented by critical analysts as definitive evidence of an agenda being imposed from above against the explicit will of the domestic populace. In the context of dystopian world-building, the architecture of the top-down global conspiracy relies on combining institutional mechanisms with the beliefs of esoteric fanatical religious groups, and their secret society recruitment and enforcement arms. Within this framework, supranational policies such as replacement migration, the Global Compact, and global wealth redistribution are recontextualized not as public policy, but as the visible, bureaucratic layer of a much deeper, multi-tiered architecture of control. The orchestrators are a highly interconnected, intergenerational Canaanitic Jewish elite, who operate through a hidden substrate that bridges public institutions, corporate monoliths, and ancient occult networks, who share complicity in extreme acts to ensure absolute loyalty and silence among the members, as the mutual exposure to ruin prevents any single individual from betraying the group. In their dystopian plot, their ultimate objective transcends mere political dominance, aiming instead for a complete restructuring of global affairs through systematic depopulation and technological enslavement. This ensures that the remaining global population is entirely dependent on the centralized infrastructure controlled by the Jewish ruling class. The internal culture of this elite ruling group is drawn from a warped interpretation of ancient religious scriptures and esoteric rituals, blending archaic practices with advanced modern technology to enforce their authority. The elites seek to establish, through the social sciences, a highly exclusive, techno-feudal enclave. Within this restricted paradise, the self-ordained rulers maintain total autonomy and supreme dominance, utilizing extreme, transgressive control mechanisms and the exploitation of children to solidify their absolute power over the remnants of humanity. In the architecture of this dystopian world building, the ultimate destination of this top-down restructuring is the realization of what they see as a modern-day, androgynous Garden of Eden. A highly exclusive, techno-feudal enclave where the ruling, sexually transgressive, pedophilic elite reigns supreme, devoid of accountability, where the exploitation of the vulnerable becomes the ultimate demonstration of power. where the ruling class, violating fundamental human taboos, is depicted not merely as a vice, but as a deliberate assertion that they exist entirely above the laws, morals, and constraints that govern ordinary humanity. Where transgressive exploitation serves as a psychological tool to break the will of the populace. By reducing human beings to commodified objects for the elite's gratification, the regime reinforces a strict hierarchy where the lower tiers of society possess no bodily autonomy or inherent rights. Within this restricted paradise, the biological and spiritual reality of the human form is radically altered, with the populace being engineered and modified in the blueprint of a modern-day Adam Kadmon. By invoking this concept of the primordial, cosmic human who embodies both masculine and feminine principles before division, the narrative highlights a deliberate effort by the Jewish self-ordained elite to transcend traditional human biology. This synthetic, androgynous state is enforced through advanced technological capabilities, merging ancient esoteric interpretations of scripture with genetic and cybernetic manipulation. In this dark mirroring of creation, the rulers seek absolute dominion not just over global resources, but over the fundamental blueprint of human existence, consolidating their power within a sterile, highly controlled utopia reserved exclusively for the architects of the new global order.